I wanted to start off this trip report with a brief summary of who I am, and where I was at in terms of my substance use going into this experience. I'm a late 30s professional, working full-time in a field I love. I wasn't looking for any escape from my life by seeking out Sapo. Philosophically, I'm a materialist. I believe the physical world is what exists, and drugs work by interacting with certain neural receptors. Although I was raised religious, I do not believe in any god or gods. I have had many years of experience with a variety of psychedelic drugs, including LSD, psilocybin, most of the 2C family, MDMA, DMT and mescaline, plus a half dozen or so exotic research chemicals in my youth. I have also tried low-dose synthetic 5-MeO-DMT on several occasions. At this point, I only use psychedelics every few years, but I am in no way a novice to these headspaces. The setting for this trip was an old Mexican archaeological site, home of a native village thousands of years ago. It was surrounded by giant boulders, showing unmistakable signs of being used for untold millennium as grinding stones under a massive tree far from any disturbance. I was with two other people, my friend who had arranged the session and a respected Mexican facilitator. Ambient music was turned on at a low volume. The facilitator knelt down next to me with the loaded pipe. Dose unclear, bowl was unpacked by facilitator. He gave a short talk about the importance of knowing I was safe, that they would watch over me, and I should surrender to the experience. He told me to be careful to not inhale the burning Sapo, and that we would start with a smaller dose, and that I could take more in half an hour or so if I wanted to go deeper. Keeping his warning in mind, I inhaled slowly but deeply. The smoke had a somewhat pleasant taste, not at all like the burning plastic sensation so common with NN-DMT. I handed the pipe back to him and laid back on the sleeping bag while still holding the smoke in my lungs, and then closed my eyes. Before I even exhaled, things were beginning to change rapidly. My sense of time began to slow. A distinct vibration sense overtook me, and an infinite field of undulating eyes, reminiscent of an Alex Gray painting, was clearly visible, as clear as I've ever seen anything with my eyes open and sober. I let the smoke out of my lungs, and at that moment, time and space collapsed entirely. I was unsure of how much of my life that I remembered was real, and how much was delusion. I was overcome with the sense of the illusory nature of being, that everything I had done up to this moment had been a program designed to bring me to this exact moment, that in fact, this very moment was the purpose of that program. I opened my eyes. I could see my own body in my lower field of vision, my friend to the left and the facilitator to the right. The trees above me shimmered with a light far more real than real light. I had no idea which part of what was happening or what I was seeing was me. And then the realization came that I was all of what was happening. I was the person lying on the blanket, the facilitator, the toad which had made these magical molecules, the boulders around me, every drop of rain that had ever fallen on the planet, every speck of dust in the distant cosmos. That it was all Maya, a dream, and that right now, the dreamer was waking up. In that moment, I knew that I was dying, that the body laying on the ground would never get up again, that in fact that body, and all of this consensus reality, was simply vanishing back into the source. The movie was over, and it was time to go home. There was no fear, no worry, no angst, because I wasn't leaving anything behind. It had all been a lesson to experience being and to reach this very moment. Everything in my life had led up to this, and it was finally time to go. This realization looped an infinite number of times. I would be me, then I would realize that there was no me, and then I would know that I was dying, or that the illusion of being was ending. And then I was me having the realization again. I once again closed my eyes and let go. I don't have any English words to describe this feeling, but I'm sure there's a long one in Sanskrit that might apply. It was pure bliss, pure acceptance of all that I had previously considered both good and bad in the world. It was accepting it all, as it is. As I started to come back into myself some time later, and realise I was in fact a person who had distinct existence from the rest of all space-time, I sat up. The facilitator gave me some minty smelling water to wash my hands with and said to me to cleanse myself. I poured it on my hands and brought it to my face. The smell helped to bring me further into myself as a distinct being. I brought my legs together in the Baddha Konasana posture. I had no idea what this was called, and I googled it as I was writing this report, and I could feel the alignment of my spine grounding me to this world. The facilitator asked if I would like to try a larger hit, and I laughed and declined his offer. I looked over at the boulders that surrounded me, and they were totally covered in incredibly detailed carvings. The style was mostly Aztec, with lots of skulls and serpents. I could look away and look back, and they stayed totally unchanged. They just were. I finally understood what would cause a person to spend a lifetime chiseling at stone to bring their vision into the world. For a drug generally considered to be not particularly visual, I was pretty damn impressed with what I was seeing. As more time passed, I started to piece together what had been the drug experience and what was my real life, but it took quite a while to feel sure of that. At an hour in, I was on my phone checking Facebook, just to confirm major parts of my backstory that I was unsure about. I'm still, a few days later, having flashes that maybe I'm still in that place where time collapsed, and this thing I'm experiencing now isn't really happening. I believe this is what is being referred to in 5 circles as reactivation. Physically, the session felt taxing, and the facilitator said my heartbeat was incredibly fast at one point in the experience, I suspect during the loops of realization. This has made me realise that I need to work more on my physical health, particularly cardio. Although I still believe that drugs operate by triggering receptors in the brain, I will admit that my agnosticism on this front has been shaken. This did not feel like a drug. It felt like remembering. And while I still think that the Greek materialists were right, I'm hoping more and more that they were wrong. After watching the Sonoran Desert Toad episode on Hamilton's Pharmacopoeia, I became interested in pursuing the 5-MeO-DMT experience by getting the toads as pets and extracting their venom by squeezing their warty glands until they squirted this milky white venom onto a vertical mirror. After letting the venom dry for about an hour, I scraped it up with a knife. I then put an amount a little smaller than the size of a paper matchbox head in my medical vaporizer. I blessed the toads, and I blessed the venom inside of the vaporizer by visualizing my left hand taking out the dark energy with each inhale, and my right hand putting pure white energy with each exhale. I then laid back, propped up in my bed under blankets to feel more natural and possibly feel more sensations. I heated up the venom inside of the glass chamber until it darkened and I could see smoke. Then I inhaled counting up to 10, then held it counting down from 10, then released it. It tasted similar to the smell of burning plastic. I laid back and looked up at my tapestry on my ceiling, and it started moving around, fluid-like, similar to mushrooms or LSD. I remember feeling like it was taking forever for me to feel really sedated, so I smoked some weed to try and amplify the effects. I remember looking up at the tapestry, and I would get waves of bright light like the centre of the mandala, and the tapestry would unify and look like a green sun shining bright with rays coming off of it, and the light coming into the dark room from the window would flicker, getting brighter and darker. I was noticeably sedated at this point, but could still move if I wanted to. It was just really difficult. So I did what I have read about in Hindu beliefs, and I surrendered to God, or the universe, and closed my eyes. I felt some pressure in my chest, so I focused on my holy heart, where everyone's higher self and superego is, and I learnt about love, and felt the universe wrap me in its cocoon of love, and felt one with it. I ran over memories of the kids I work with, and feelings of loneliness I had went away when I realised how much love I receive every single day, because love truly does come in so many forms, and everyone is the creator of their own future. Whether you believe in the biblical teaching of you reap what you sow, or you believe in karma, it's the exact same thing. Energy is your thoughts, words and actions, and if you put loving energy into the world, then you will receive loving energy back. Then I felt pressure where my collarbones meet, which is where I meditate on my soul. I learnt that knowledge is power, and that because I'm a teacher, I have the most power in the world. The kids that I now teach, will one day go on to teach other kids the same life lessons. And because of that, without teachers, the world has no power. Then I focused on my third eye, where I meditate on my third eye and the colours started swirling around in my head. Here I felt one with all, and I felt out of my body and in a new dimension entirely. I called out and asked if I was with God, and I felt a reassuring yes given by him. He had told me that I had reached moksha by becoming one with him in this life. I then opened my eyes and moved my fingers and toes around, then the rest of my body. I then got up out of my bed, and it was very noticeable that it was hard to move around. The peak lasted about 30 minutes from the beginning, and the after effects of feeling good, bright lights and some but less visual movements lasted an hour or so afterwards. I had already smoked bufo alvarius, and the experience was intense and beautiful, but no great spiritual breakthrough was achieved. This time I'd prepared myself by reading through some Buddhist texts, such as the Tibetan Book of Death, where the first phase is where the good universal energy tests you to see if you are ready to accept it and experience nirvana. I have to say that I don't literally believe in this, but it did give me the guidance to know how to treat the high of the toad. I would accept whatever came without any resistance. I want to add that I am a spiritual person, but not extremely so. I meditate with the Vipassana method on a daily basis. I think this really influenced my experience going in. The shaman knew my first experience was a bit spiritually mellow. Therefore, this time he gave me an extra dose, plus the night before I did take a bit of ayahuasca. I will go straight into the experience. As soon as the smoke hit my lungs, I started feeling the intensity of the high, and I basically said, let's flow with this. I travelled into a black hole in my subconscious, or what seemed to be my subconscious, combined with the whole universe, and I woke up and was overwhelmed by energy and some kind of divine power. I saw the shaman singing and thought, this is real, this is not just a psychedelic at play. I started singing or something like that, but it was just a People thought I was liberating stuff, but the reality was that this sound came from awe. The awe of experiencing something completely out of the normal psychedelic experience. Something divine. God, or the white light that the Tibetan Book of Death talks about. It was a massive, creative, universal energy without form that invaded everything. I brought my attention inwards, and for the first time ever, I felt absolute equanimity. I understood and was able to cope with anything, from the worst tragedy, such as somebody stomping in right now with a gun, to the biggest miracle, which in reality was that exact moment. It is very hard to explain, but I was able to know that I was seeing something divine. I am very rational and only believe in the empirical. However, this was the empirical data I had to see to believe, really believe in something spiritual. It gave me hope and massive joy to know that this energy was real, that even if sick, bad things happen, the energy will make sure that everything continues. Moreover, this energy was inherently good, not neutral as I had thought before. The funny thing is that I did not have attachment to this state. I was not thinking, even though I already seemed to have come down. I just comprehended it. I was not attached to anything and there was no mind. Everything was perfect. From what I have read, this was nirvana, but with a touch of the divine. The state lasted the entire next day. However, I have to say that 6 days after, I'm still somewhat in that state, but when I fall asleep, I get this dream where I feel trippy and I wake up instantly agitated. Then, when I consciously decide to accept that trippy state, the next time I fall asleep, I go almost straight into ecstasy. This experience was so intense for me that my subconscious is taking its time assimilating it, but in these cases, one should not fear but be open to this adjustment, because in the end, the medicine is just trying to help you. I will always be grateful for this experience, and to have had the privilege to be in that state. For this experience, I used a reputable retreat lodge in Costa Rica. I'd never read about this stuff, and really went into it without any knowledge or preconceptions. In some ways, I'm glad. I'm also relieved that I used a reputable shaman, as this is not the drug to do alone for several reasons. The ceremony started early at 10 AM. I knew I may feel nauseous, so I did not eat anything beforehand. We signed some disclaimers and went into the maloka. There were about 10 of us, and we all sat in a circle on mats, but the bufo was administered one person at a time in the centre. Not only was there the shaman, but 4 other helpers to add support during and after the experience. I was a little apprehensive, and that must have been noted by the shaman, because I was called up to go first. I was given a piece of paper to read out aloud, being my intentions to love myself, let my ego go, and be at one with the medicine. I was a little scared at first, but as I looked into the shaman's eyes, I felt that I really trusted him. He lit the pipe and gave it to me. I took as much back as I could, but I was choking on the smoke, and then the nausea set in instantly. The effects of this medicine are immediate. I vomited quite hard, and for at least a minute, at the same time the hallucinations began, I saw spirals of colour and kaleidoscopic shapes in front of my face. I was aware of the shaman asking if I wanted more, but I declined. In hindsight, I wished I had, because I really didn't get that much of an experience other than passing out and not remembering much. Fast forward to the second time. I felt I had missed out on my first experience, and I realised that the shaman was trying to give me more for me to have the ultimate experience, and I hadn't listened to him. It was the same shaman in a different location. I felt this time I was ready to go the whole way. However, this time I had extreme anxiety and fear going in. I was the last person to go, and I had 3 nerve-wracking hours in which I just wanted to run away. When it came to my turn, I was petrified and shaking, but I knew I had to let go and listen. I took back as much of the pipe as humanly possible. Amazingly, this time I didn't purge. I saw the same kaleidoscopic shapes whirling in front of my face, and felt the arms of everyone pulling me back into the mattress. This time was completely different. My soul lifted out of my human body, and I was able to float through the universe, marvelling at being one with time and space. It was short-lived and over within 20 minutes, but when I came round, I was full of love and joy, amazed at what had just transpired. As the day went on, it became harder to remember exactly what happened, but I think that's normal. It carries on over the weeks as a feeling of happiness, a pure afterglow. However, this medicine is not to be taken lightly. I would never take it without an experienced shaman, because for 10 minutes, I was completely having an out-of-body experience and was not conscious or aware of physical reality. It would be easy to choke on vomit during this period. I also saw other people having experiences where they stood up and yelled at the shaman and tried to walk, not being able to or aware, which is very dangerous. I was worried at first that the anxiety I felt would taint my experience and give me a bad trip, but thankfully, that couldn't have been further from the truth. So those were a handful of some pretty interesting toad venom experiences. A lot of them had a mystical quality to them. The first 2 reports were actually on sapo, or kambo, which is the dried skin secretions of the kambo, which is a species of frog, and it's used as a transdermal medicine, but also has psychedelic properties. As we can see in the first report, it completely shifted the OP's perception on his agnosticism. He even says he was a materialist in the classical Greek sense, and this experience completely deconstructed his paradigm almost that he clung to, and he's now opened his mind to possible other realities, other explanations. That's what's so amazing about, say, these ritualistic psychedelic experiences that happen in the Amazon. Oftentimes there is a deeper spiritual component to it due to the setting that it's in, as well as the way it's prepared, and also the vibe and energy from the shaman and the people involved in the experience can also add to that mystical quality of, because sometimes you can obviously have a spiritual experience in your room. It's very, very possible. I mean, I've done it before, but it helps with those that are sort of resisting it to actually go and do it in this setting that's completely out of their usual world of the normal, mundane sort of materialistic world that we live in. You go to the jungle and people are all very spiritual, all quite animistic. That's gonna affects your trip as well. Obviously, you could say that, oh, that's the only reason there was a spiritual component is because the people around you are spiritual and you become the average of who you're surrounded by, but it's just a perspective, isn't it? But there are a lot of anecdotal reports that all link in like that. But the last two, they were actually on the bufo alvarius secretion, which we've covered before. Bufotenin and 5-MeO-DMT is secreted from this toad. It's probably the most famous psychedelic toad that we know of. There's lots of great videos out there on YouTube that talk about that. I'll link the Hamilton's Pharmacopoeia episode on the kambo variety in the description if you're interested in that. It's a really great watch. Even though these reports had very similar experiences for the writers, I'd say for the most part that the bufo alvarius toad is more likely to produce a non-dual mystical experience than the sapo variety. Obviously, it's all relative, isn't it? It's all subjective. Everyone's experiences are different, and these people all just happen to have a breakthrough based upon their own chemical that they ingested. But I'd say for the most part, to generalise, that bufo alvarius is going to be a better way for you to achieve these heightened states of consciousness and realising infinity, realising source, etc. So yeah, hope you enjoyed this one, and I'll see you in the next one, guys.